Hi everyone, my name is Vanessa van Dijk, and in today's video I want to explain why I no longer think most acne breakouts or food triggers are actually the foods themselves. Because one of the biggest things that never fully made sense to me was how random and inconsistent these supposed trigger foods were. Sometimes I could eat something and be completely fine. Other times the exact same food would suddenly cause massive breakouts. And honestly, the more this kept happening, the more I started wondering if I was looking at the problem completely wrong. Because what if the issue is not always the isolated food itself, but the overall internal environment the body is already in before eating it? At first, I honestly thought certain foods themselves were toxic or inflammatory in some specific way. So naturally, I started isolating foods one by one. I even bought organic foods because I assumed pesticides or toxic residues on whole foods were the primary reason behind my breakouts. And of course, I tested many of the common theories very carefully over time. I went gluten-free, I eliminated dairy, I experimented with different oils, I removed seed oils and replaced them with things like olive oil. I even tried isolating specific fruits because sometimes foods like apples or pears seem to constantly correlate with breakouts. And honestly, sometimes these approaches seem to help, but other times they didn't. For example, with dairy I noticed that certain products seemed to cause issues while others didn't. Cow milk cheese seemed problematic, while cheese from sheep or goat milk often worked much better for me. So again, it looked like I was finding answers. But then the deeper problem was that the patterns still remained inconsistent overall. And that's where things started getting strange to me. Same thing with fast food like pizza. If you watched my first video about acne and diet, you might remember that I had a pizza day once a week, usually something like a Domino's pizza, and often it was completely fine, especially when I reduced sauces on it. But then on other occasions, if I ate pizza multiple days in a row or added another processed food like a burger the next day, suddenly my breakouts would explode. And that's when I started asking myself, if the food itself is the issue, then why is the reaction sometimes completely different? So naturally I assumed, okay, maybe there's something specific inside that food causing the issue. Maybe the gluten, the dairy, the seed oils, the histamine, the preservatives, the pesticides, the sugar, or some kind of food intolerance. And when you look online, those are usually the exact same explanations you find there as well. Gluten, dairy, nightshades, seed oils, histamine, toxins, food intolerances, and so on. And again, I want to be very clear here. I'm not denying that real intolerances exist. But the more I looked at all of this, the more I started noticing something that honestly seemed way too obvious for me to have ignored for so long. A lot of these foods were simply extremely high in sodium. And honestly, I think this is where most people actually get fooled by randomness. Because sodium is almost invisible psychologically. We are used to thinking about sugar, fat, calories, gluten, chemicals, toxins. But almost nobody seriously thinks about chronic sodium exposure and fluid retention patterns. Especially because the body can temporarily compensate and adapt for a long time. And that's where I started wondering if maybe the breakout was not always coming from the isolated food itself, but from the body already being in some kind of overloaded fluid retention state beforehand. Because if you really think about it, this would explain why the exact same food can sometimes seem completely fine and other times suddenly push the system over the edge. For example, someone eats pizza once and looks completely fine. But then another time they eat multiple salty processed foods close together, or they consume them during a period where the body is already retaining more fluid hormonally. And suddenly the system gets overloaded. And that is when the breakout happens. So then the conclusion becomes pizza causes acne, gluten causes acne, nightshades cause acne, seed oils cause acne, when what these foods may actually have in common is the chronic sodium-heavy environment surrounding them. And honestly, this is why I increasingly think modern sodium exposure is one of the biggest overlooked factors in acne breakouts. Because the official sodium guidelines are already around 2,000 to 3,000 milligrams depending on the source. Yet many people consume modern processed foods, go far above that consistently without even realizing it. And personally, reaching or even undercutting those guideline levels consistently was one of the single biggest things that improved my skin. More than obsessing over random trigger foods. Because once the sodium fluid retention environment improved, many of the supposedly problematic foods suddenly became much less problematic too. And then when you overall have a balanced diet with mostly whole foods, the occasional fast food incursion becomes much less of an issue. And if it does become an issue, at least now you understand much better why it could be happening. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!